Anthropic is now calling for a possible global pause on AI development. How realistic is this in today's competitive tech race?
Yeah, I don't really see it as something that is going to work because China is building. Other labs and AI companies are building in the United States. And it seems as if Anthropic, with this move, is really just trying to pull up the drawbridge behind them because they're about to hit a huge IPO. Could be as large as $1 trillion. Will be minting plenty of new millionaires. You could argue that they're probably the furthest ahead right now when it comes to AI development, when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to tool calling. So they are the #1 company in terms of all the benchmarks right now. So it's pretty clear why they would want other companies to stop. I think this is something that they're supporting rhetorically, but probably would not want to see in practice. It would be a way that they could kind of lock in their own dominant status, and it would deprive many of the other competitors, particularly those that are open source or many of those who are in China or many of the labs and companies that are trying to build in the United States. It would actually halt their development too. So I think this is a way that Anthropic is essentially putting out the good rhetoric, but if they actually saw the impact of what a global pause would be, it would be disastrous, not just for people who are now reliant on these AI tools and every consumer who connects to the internet, but also for these companies too. So I do think it is something that is being rhetorically used at the moment, but probably won't be used in practice.
And they're warning about systems moving toward recursive self-improvement. Can you explain what that means in practical terms and why it's seen as being so significant?
When you have self-improvement, it essentially means that now that we have all of these AI models and people are deploying them on their own computers, on their own servers, they're able to learn not just from the patterns of you putting inputs in there, but then also the behavior and the actions that they're supposed to take. So it has within a general frame an idea of what it's supposed to do as an AI tool. For example, it's supposed to, do these kind of research reports. It's supposed to improve them. It's supposed to look at the news, and if there's regulatory guidelines, make that adjustments itself without a human touch. And I think that is what is concerning a lot of people is, do you have a human in the loop in order so that these kind of configurations, actions, whether it be just in code or in physical watts, things that we can actually see in front of us, are we going to have some kind of guardrails? I think that's what Anthropic specifically is talking about. They just came out with their own big Mythos model. They gave that in beta version to many different researchers across Canada, US, and Europe. They're purportedly about to release it either this week or next for the general public. And this is being used by a lot of cybersecurity experts. And people are afraid that there are going to be more Trojan horses. There's going to be more viruses online. And if we have these kind of self-maximalizing recursive agent processes that are learned, it could mean a lot for security online. So I think it's a genuine concern. We're not there yet. The technology is still very new, so we don't really have that, but it is something that they're right to discuss and talk about, and definitely guardrails plays into that.
And with what Anthropic is requesting or looking for, who would actually enforce a global pause on AI development? Would it be governments, companies, or some international body?
Yeah, for when it comes to an international body, there's no one that would be technically or realistically regulatorily competent enough to do that. So it would have to be some kind of, forgive the term, but a gentleman's agreement between all the major companies. And they have enough beef. You have OpenAI, which is not only fighting with Elon, who has his own AI company, but they're also fixing to put their own IPO out there to go out into the public markets. So it's sort of a dog-eat-dog world. And while all of this is happening with many of the American models and even the Canadian models, the Chinese have open source models that are meeting very similar benchmarks. So they're actually performing just as well as some of these American models. And I think that's something that we have to consider too, is you could put a pause on all of the Western companies that are developing AI, but who's going to stop China? And is any agreement, whether it be on paper or even facilitated by the UN, is that something that China is going to listen to? I would probably say no. So ideally, the best thing you can do is offer guardrails for consumers, for people who are using these things, try to make rules that are industry standards, protect people's data and their privacy and their information, and then we can really allow a lot of the benefits of AI to continue to flow. But having a kind of pause like this where you're not really going to be able to enforce it, I think it would just give a lot of leverage to some of those other companies and not necessarily help everyone else.
And critics say a pause could slow innovation and give an advantage to less regulated countries or companies. Would you say that's a valid concern?
I think absolutely. If you were to freeze a lot of the development that's happening in research that you have in the United States and in Canada, again, Canada has some pretty good open source models too, then it means that in other countries like China, where it is a bit more open, where they don't have the same regulations, where they are focused on sort of world domination of AI compute and models, they're just going to go ahead full steam ahead. And, for the average person who uses a lot of these models, they're faced with a choice. Do I want to use something that's stopped, that's paused, or do I want to use something that is constantly developing, getting better each and every day, like a lot of the Chinese models are? So we really have to think about that from a nationalistic point of view. But then also, do we want our models made in liberal democracies, or do we want them made in places like China? And it is something to where if we're putting any roadblocks in front of our own developers and our own entrepreneurs in liberal democracies, they're not going to follow that nor respect that elsewhere. So it is something to think about. And at least one way that we can continue to have a competitive edge is to let our people build and let them provide value to people who could use AI right now.